Hello everyone and welcome to our second lecture. This one is over the foundations of public speaking. It's a really fun one that goes all the way back to the classical roots of rhetoric and public speaking. So let's jump right in. So on a very basic and distilled down level, rhetoric is defined as the practice of oratory or public speaking, and more broadly and in a more contemporary sense, rhetoric is a term with multiple meanings, all of which relate to the aspects of human communication. So rhetoric is a famously difficult term to pin down within our discipline, and it takes on a variety of meanings. However, you should just know that it has to do with the way that we use our messages, our body language, the context surrounding a rhetorical situation to persuade someone or communicate with someone in any given situation. And as Aristotle defines it, rhetoric is the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. Okay, so if we go back to the foundations of rhetoric, early rhetoric, the practice of oratory began in Greece in the 5th century BCE. And Athens, Greece was the site of the world's first direct democracy. So a lot of the governmental processes that we see right now came from what the Greeks did first. And therefore, the Greeks needed these skills to help them settle civil disputes, determine public policy, and establish laws. So if you think about these three functions of government, all of them take a lot of communicating, a lot of persuading people, and a lot of sending clear messages. So in order for a democracy to work well, the Greeks needed to figure out how to use rhetoric in everyday life. So within oratory, there are three main types. The first one is forensic oratory. This is legal speech that you would see in a courtroom that attorneys are using to argue a case. The second one is deliberative oratory, and this is legislative or political speech. So think of the House or Senate floor when our Congress is making laws and developing laws for the people. That is deliberative oratory. Third, we have epidictic oratory, and this is speech delivered in ceremonies such as celebrations or funerals. Anything that is meant to honor or celebrate someone or something, that is epidictic. Here is a little list of important people in the history of rhetoric. The first pair I'll talk about is Corax and Tisias. Now, Corax is sort of known as the first sophist, and sophists are traveling teachers of rhetoric. They think they can make some money by teaching people how to speak properly and defend themselves in court, because at this point in Grecian history, there aren't really lawyers, attorneys who can defend people in court. So Corax and Tisias get together. Corax is to teach Tisias the art of rhetoric, but Tisias says that he will not pay tuition until he wins a lawsuit. Corax agrees. He then teaches Tisias all there is to know about rhetoric and the art of oratory, and then Tisias never goes to court, right? So Corax is mad that he never got paid for his teachings and sues Tisias, and they go to court against each other. Let me read you the arguments from AmericanRhetoric.com between Corax and Tisias. So Tisias says, "In court, your honors, I stand before you today in humility of spirit and purity of motive. I ask only that you listen patiently and judge rightly in issuing your verdict. Your honors, I charge Corax for failing to teach me well the art of rhetoric. The proof of this charge is here before us today. For if I should lose my case, it will surely prove that I was not taught rhetoric very well, and this being the case, I should not have to pay the tuition. For no one should have to pay for services that weren't rendered according to what was promised. On the other hand, if I win the case, it shows that I had enough sense and talent to figure out the art of rhetoric on my own, despite the negligence of my instructor. But even this is not necessary to my case, for a ruling against Corax is a ruling for me, and a ruling for me means I do not have to pay my tuition. In either case, then, I should not have to pay tuition." Then Corax comes back and says, "Your honors, I too stand humbly before you. I too recognize in years far more experience than that of my adversary your outstanding record of prudent and just decision-making on behalf of those whose cause is just. We are indeed fortunate to gain a hearing before you. This, then, is my case. I have given Tisias the very best education in rhetoric of which I am capable, on the condition that he would at some point in his career pay my tuition. This he has not done. Now, if you rule against me, that is, if Tisias does in fact win his case, it serves to show that I taught him rhetoric well, in which case he should be required to pay my tuition. If, however, Tisias does not win his case, that would show him to be a poor or rather bad student. We already know he is poor. Though those who are wise well know that a teacher is not to be faulted if, in discharging his services well and faithfully, the student is simply too stupid or too lazy, or too both, to take advantage of those services, expertly rendered. But even this is unnecessary to my case, for a ruling against Tisias is a ruling in favor of me. Such a ruling would, of course, mean that Tisias must pay my tuition. In either case, then, my tuition should be paid. So, obviously a bit of a paradox. The question is, has Tisias won or has Corax won? Here is the decision in Greek. I can't pronounce it, so here's the translation. From a bad crow, a bad egg, or when a mischievous bird of prey lays an egg, the egg too is mischievous. And the verdict is a play on words, very cleverly. Corax means crow, and Tisias means eggs. The case was, in effect, thrown out of court. I guess it was a tie, but in my opinion, Tisias won because he went to court, he got all of the rhetoric teaching, and he never had to pay tuition. Along with Corax, we have a bunch of other traveling teachers of public speaking known as the Sophists of ancient Greece. And these people would go around and take in students and teach them how to speak publicly in order to defend themselves in court. The Sophists sort of went up against Socrates, who is the father of philosophy. He is this old Greek sort of curmudgeonly philosopher who is very skeptical of the Sophists because he feels that they're using fallacious arguments with a lot of fallacy and really just using the artistic means of persuasion rather than deep intellectual thought in order to argue. And so Socrates rails against the Sophists and people like them throughout his entire career. Plato, also a very famous philosopher, was the student of Socrates, and we know a ton about Socrates only through the writings of Plato, such as Plato's Gorgias or Plato's Phaedrus, which I've had to read for class. These are really interesting dialogues between Socrates and usually the titular character of these books, and in a lot of these we know that Socrates is railing against the false arts of persuasion that the Sophists are using. Lastly, we have Aristotle, who is our big guy here in public speaking, really a champion of public speaking for us, and of course was the student of Plato. So if you see there on the left, it goes SPA. So remember SPA for Socrates taught Plato, who taught Aristotle. These are our big three, and we'll learn more about what Aristotle thought about public speaking within the next few slides. Our guiding principles of public speaking come from the 5 canons of rhetoric, which were developed by Aristotle, who we just talked about, and Cicero, who was a Roman orator. So, up first we have invention. And invention includes discovering the types of evidence and arguments you plan to make your case, adapting speech information to the audience in order to make your case. So within the invention stage, we're brainstorming a lot, we're gathering different sources that back up our arguments, and we're using audience analysis in order to see how we're going to craft our argument. Up next we have arrangement, and this is organizing the speech in ways that are best suited to the topic and to the audience. So as we'll learn later in the semester, organizing a speech depends wholly on what type of speech it is and who your audience is. So the training and briefing speech might be organized in a very specific way, whereas the persuasive speech follows a completely different sequence, and we'll learn all about those possible organizational patterns later on in the semester. Number 3, we have style, which is the way the speaker uses language to express the speech's ideas. Again, the speech's language is going to depend on what kind of speech it is and who your audience is. You might use more technical language and explain it through description in a training and briefing speech, whereas in a persuasive speech, maybe you're using more artful language, more concrete imagery in order to take your audience somewhere and really explain to them and convince them of whatever you're trying to convince them of. Coming in at number 4 is memory, and they actually call memory the lost canon because with today's types of technologies and the internet, we don't have to remember things quite as often as the ancient Greeks did when writing was very first coming around. And Socrates was actually very suspicious of writing and what it would do to society because he felt that memory was very important in passing down values and teachings to our children. So memory is the lost canon. It's very important still in public speaking, and within this course you'll be able to flex those memory muscles when you're going over your speech and practicing for the final take, right? So memory is obviously the practice of the speech until it can be artfully delivered. The last of our 5 canons of rhetoric is delivery. This is the vocal and nonverbal behavior you use when speaking publicly. So delivery is huge, of course, and we'll learn a whole lot more about delivery. Basically, it's everything that surrounds your message, the words you are saying, both in your nonverbals and the tonal or vocal changes you use in order to deliver your message. As promised, let's learn a little bit more about Aristotle's impact on rhetoric. Mainly, they are these rhetorical proofs, or these 3 ways of making a speech persuasive. You've probably already learned about these, so I won't go over them too much, but they are absolutely essential to insert into every single speech you have. The first one is logos or logos, and these are appeals to logic or reason. So obviously your argument has to make sense. It has to flow logically, and the audience has to be able to see your argument for what it is without poking holes in it, right? Secondly, we have ethos or ethos. These are appeals to speaker credibility and character. So how are you coming off as a speaker? Are you trustworthy, reliable, reputable? Are you using good sources to back up your evidence? Stuff like that. Lastly, we have pathos, which are appeals to emotion, and more specifically, tragic emotion like sadness or anger. Pathos is all about tugging on the heartstrings of your audience, putting them into the shoes of someone, and really convincing them of your main points. On this very last slide, we have what is called the communication process. It looks a little bit complicated, and that's because it is. It is a continuous cycle of sending and receiving messages and feedback, and it happens day in and day out because humans are inherently communicative. So let's go over it in a little bit more detail. So typically the communication process starts over here in this left yellow box. There is a source or a speaker who sends out a message. First, that message must be encoded, which means creating or developing a message. So the speaker thinks of what to say, they encode this message and send it along a channel. Now with this message, there is included a lot of context or anything that surrounds the message that isn't the actual words of the message, right? So it's going along this channel and all of a sudden it runs into some noise. Noise is anything that can possibly distract the message from being received properly by the receiver or the audience. However, if the message makes it through all that distracting noise to the receiver or the audience must then decode the message or try to comprehend or understand it. Once that happens, the audience encodes what is called feedback. Feedback is the responses that the audience gives back to the speaker or the source. So they send that along a channel or a medium. Again, this feedback runs into some noise or distractions, extra context that is contrary to the message or the feedback can also be considered noise, and it happens a lot. Once that feedback makes it back to the source then must decode that feedback. So how did our audience receive our message? In turn, that speaker sends another message, right? So it's a back and forth process through and through. If the communication process works properly, or at least kind of properly, there is created some shared meaning between both the source and the receiver, or the speaker and the audience. So they come up with some kind of shared meaning, and with that they can work on shared goals and hopefully produce some good outcomes with that communication. This diagram is toward the beginning of your Pocket Guide to Public Speaking. If you'd like to take another look at it and really go over it before our first quiz, it's very important to the communication process, and you'll see this in action not only in your everyday lives, but especially when we're working on our public speaking skills. That's it for our Module 2 lecture today. I hope y'all enjoyed learning about the classical early roots of rhetoric as well as the communication process. I will see y'all very soon. Thank you.